Just to clarify, I'm not actually a medical doctor. I have a Ph.D. in American literature and American studies. So, but I am, but doctore is teacher. So I am a doctor in a way, but I just needed to say that. So that's a great segue. How many people in this room are medical professionals? Either at some point in your life you were a doctor or a nurse or anything in between. Raise your hand. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And how many people in this room are lawyers? We've got 2. Wow, it's really hard to see the audience. And how many people in this room work in the nonprofit sector? A few more than that. And what else am I missing? Who else is in? Well, how many of you are activists? Okay, now I've got almost every hand up. That's good to see. And then, is there anybody here who this is the first time you've ever been to a conference put on by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library? Wow, oh my God, look at that. That's wonderful. So yesterday, there was an article that came out in the news about norovirus. Have you heard about it? Norovirus. One person, everybody else, 2 people, 3 people, a few people have heard about it. So I'm actually this was a norovirus outbreak in Seattle, and it was a 154-word article that was in the Seattle PI. And I'm just gonna read you a little bit of it. It says, more than 100 students and staff at a Seattle public school were reported as sick Thursday in an apparent outbreak of norovirus. The elementary school will be closed Friday. The building will undergo a cleaning by the school's custodial staff. No staff or students can be in the building under order of public health, which is capitalized, Seattle and King County. Officials hope to reopen the school on Monday. In a statement, the district also states, no other schools are impacted, and besides Leachy Elementary, there have not been other reports of a greater than normal number of cases of illness among students and staff at any other school in the district. 3 other Washington schools have also closed due to concerns over illnesses. The Vancouver School District announced Thursday that 3 of its schools are being extensively cleaned after dozens of students called out sick. The district sent a letter to parents warning of stomach flu symptoms. That's it, that's the whole article, 154 words. And here's what I noticed about it. It's factual. It gives information that parents and Seattle residents need to know. I don't see any fear-mongering. I don't hear any shaming, and I don't see any pointing fingers or assigning blame. But that's very interesting because 100, did you get that part? 100 students and staff members are sick. So many people are vomiting and having diarrhea that they have closed the entire school. And I'm just curious, in your experience, either growing up as a kid or with your own children, did you ever have a situation where there were so many people sick that the whole school closed down? If you did, please raise your hand. There's not a single hand up. Another one, yes. Right, but I'm asking about the past, right? So we have been seeing school closures because kids are sick, and I'm going to come back for that. Norovirus, some of you know what it is, some of you maybe have never heard of it before. It's interesting. It's extremely contagious virus. There's many, many different ones of them. It causes diarrhea and vomiting. And what about norovirus that you really need to know? There's no vaccine for norovirus. The reason why this article doesn't talk about the problems with norovirus and how unbelievably virulent it is that it closes down an entire school of 100 people, staff and students, is because there is no vaccine. So because there's no vaccine, we can't blame and shame anybody. We can't say, oh, the reason why so many people have this illness is because of those vaccine hesitant parents or those anti-vaxxers. So it's just factual information to give people the tools they need to know what's going on without any media bias or any slant on it, which I think is very interesting. When you have a disease for which there is a vaccine, even when the reason for the illness is vaccine failure, you see very different articles, and every one of you has read them, and I don't know where you're coming from, and I don't know what kind of response you're having in your body right now. At least we've got some tools from Lori and Mark to start tapping as I'm talking, right? But you know that when we have an outbreak when we have a death from the flu, when a person is vaccinated against the flu, so that happened twice this week. 2 people died from the flu this week. A 36-year-old man in Las Vegas, Nevada, and an 86-year-old woman in San Diego, California. The headlines of those articles, it says flu deaths. The flu is very virulent. The first sentence or the second sentence of each of those articles, both of those people were vaccinated against the flu. Please notice that the headline of the article was not flu vaccine failure or why are vaccinated people dying of the flu. But then when we have measles, and you'll see we have epidemics, we hear that we're not hearing that there's a norovirus epidemic. We're not hearing that there's this huge outbreak. We're just hearing that a few people got sick, 100 people got sick in a historical moment that is unprecedented. Not a single person of the 100 people who are in this room said that they've ever heard of this happening before. So this is actually huge news, and it's a little tiny article in a small newspaper, just 100 words. And what I want you to know about that is that we use all sorts of, you just heard about it from Mark and from Lori, is that the media is manipulating us all the time. And we're using all kinds of tactics and all kinds of fear-mongering. And what Mark said so brilliantly is that what are they trying to sell you? When somebody wants to provoke a fear response, you didn't talk about that book that you put up there called Triggers, but so I was curious about that. But what I was imagining is that when you want someone to change somebody's behavior, when you want to influence them, you trigger them. Is that part of the gist of what was that about? So I don't have anything to sell you about norovirus. I can't trigger you into hating the person sitting next to you because that person chose not to get that vaccine. Because there is no vaccine, I can't sell you a pharmaceutical product. All I can give you is a little bit of information, and then I'm going to move on. So we'll come back and talk about that more, but here's what I want you to know. This is the gloom and doom part of my talk, but I promise we won't stay on it for too long. We know that America's children are sicker than they've ever been in recent history. We know that we have one of the highest infant mortality rates in the entire industrialized world. I think you know that. Maybe you haven't heard that before, but it's important to know it now. And what's important about that is not only because you can argue about how you quantify an infant mortality rate, but if you look at all of the other industrialized worlds, what we see when we graph it is that their infant mortality rates are going down, and they've steadily been going down for the last couple of decades, while in the United States, our infant mortality rates are going up. So we have a problem that our numbers are moving in the wrong direction. We also know that things like sudden infant death syndrome, asthma, allergies, encephalitis, encephalopathy, severe eczema, food allergies, and of course obesity are all on the rise in the United States. So in a word, our children are sick. And they're not doing well. They're suffering. They're dying at rates higher than other people's children, other countries' children. A child in America is 3 times more likely to die before their 3rd month of life than a child in many other countries, including Japan and Greece, and countries that you would be surprised to hear about. The thing is that adults are actually not doing much better. So you've probably seen the headlines about this, that our life expectancy rate is relatively high. It's just shy of 79. It depends on which rubric you're looking at, but our life, according to the CDC, we live in the United States till about 78 years old, maybe a little bit longer. Some people here have already way surpassed that, which is exciting to have you in the audience. So compared to other countries, that's not a bad life expectancy rate. I lived and worked twice in my adult life in West Africa, in Niger, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, where people do not have access to clean drinking water and good nutrition, and the life expectancy there is only 56 years old. So in that sense, we're doing well, but again, we're seeing a decline. So the last 3 years in a row, the life expectancy has gone down in the United States, just small downticks in the last 3 years for which we have statistics. And so people are very interested in why this is happening and what's going on. And one of the most shocking things about that is that it looks like we know about the opioid epidemic. We know that addiction and overdose is one of the reasons. Another one of the reasons for our diminishing life expectancy may be our suicide rates. And the suicide rates that have gone up the highest, the most precipitously, is suicide among young people. So people under the age of 35. And I have 4 children. So my oldest 2 children are both in college. One is going to college on the East Coast and one is going to college here on the West Coast. And I can tell you that what I see, I'm always interested when I'm reading a newspaper article, although I don't read newspapers anymore, when I'm reading it online. Unlike the 2 people who raised their hands and said that they still read the newspaper every day. But you know, when I'm looking at that kind of thing, I'm always interested in what I'm hearing on the ground from my own children. And I can confirm for you that young adults in America have a feeling, at least many of them, many of college age students have huge anxiety. They're dealing with these feelings of, you know, helplessness and hopelessness, and that affect, now we've heard from Mark, that their feelings of anxiety and despair and I'm not good enough and there's no place for me in this world, that those things are actually affecting our collective unconscious, right? That's what Mark would be saying, except that he's talking over there, so I'm not sure if that's right. There's another, oh good, okay, good. It's very strange, there's this really bright light on me, so I can't see your faces very well. Another reason, and of course all of this is up for conversation and debate, but another reason that we may be seeing declining life expectancy rates in the United States is the unbelievable explosion of autism. And I can say it like encephalitis and encephalopathy because then I'm not triggering. When you say the word autism, you start triggering. People start having very strong reactions, but we have over 1 million people in the United States under 18 years old who are affected by autism. And why does that matter for life expectancy? Because the average age of a child with autism is 36 years old. So we're seeing that. We're seeing all kinds of deaths associated with the kind of brain damage that our children are experiencing today. So why did I spend so much time on that gloom and doom, and why do I want you to know about those statistics? The reason is because public health is failing us. The public health in that article with the capital P and the capital H is that what we need to know is that we are being failed by our public health system. You have a 1 in 59, a child born in America today has a 1 in 59 chance of becoming autistic, whereas the statistic from, what is it, 1970 was 1 in 10,000. So we've gone in from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 59. If you get to the age of 20 years old, you on average have received 17 courses of antibiotics. So what we are doing very well, it seems to me, is that we are doing very well disrupting children's brains and disrupting children's bodies, depleting our natural microbiome. The microbiome is the organisms that live on us and in us that we cohabitate with. When you take a round of antibiotics, you disrupt that. 17 courses of antibiotics by the time you're 20 years old. That really concerns me. So whenever you see a newspaper article or a magazine article or an online blog of any kind that is trying to sell you status quo medicine, you have to ask yourself if that newspaper or magazine is reporting on it fairly. And we are told that fake news is the alternative health news. And in fact, you saw the slide that Mark put up about DuckDuckGo. Right now, there is a concerted effort among Google, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, and other media sites to limit your access to any alternative health information. So I have an article on my website that is by a Yale University vaccine researcher, and it talks about why the timing of some childhood vaccines might not be optimal. If you try to share that article, so this is somebody with a Ph.D. in immunology who did her postdoctoral degree at Yale, and it's her words. If you try to share that, it's been red flagged on Facebook. If you try to share that article, it will say, this article is in violation of our community standards. So you cannot read it, you cannot get access to it. So somebody who really wanted people to read it and was very excited about it went ahead and put the article up on Medium. And then Medium said to her, well, do you have the right to this article, because that could be a copyright violation. And so she immediately contacted me and said, you know, I put this article up because I was trying to share it on Facebook. I couldn't share it. I put it on medium.com. And I need to know, could I have the right to use it? And I said, of course, absolutely. I'm delighted for you. Thank you for thinking of it. So she put it up on Medium. It stayed up for exactly 1 day, and they took it off. And if you look for it on Medium, the URL is there. You can get it from the Wayback Machine, which is a wonderful service if you're looking for things that have been taken offline. But you absolutely cannot read it. And again, it says it's in violation of community standards. And now Pinterest actually deleted the word vaccine from their search terms. And on YouTube, which is very interesting because YouTube, unlike Facebook and Pinterest, is a money-generating social media platform. So there are people who can make a living. You can make a good living on YouTube based on you as the consumer when you watch their stuff. On YouTube, if you start giving information that's alternative, quote unquote, information about vaccines, they can delete your channel. And if they delete your channel, you don't get it back. You haven't captured those. If you have 1 million, my co-author has over 1 million followers, subscribers on his YouTube channel. It's Paul Thomas, MD. And he's somebody who writes very balanced and fair and factual information about vaccines. His producer took every vaccine video off because if they lose their 1 million+ followers, then they lose their livelihood. His producer is his son, and that's one of the ways that he makes a living. So there's this concerted effort to stop the conversation, to limit your access. And am I saying that everything you read in the alternative media is correct? Absolutely not. I mean, everything that we're seeing problematic with the mainstream media, we're also seeing in the alternative media. But the issue here is that you no longer get to, we had 2 speakers tell us to be empowered, to be thoughtful, to start taking control of your own life and being in the driver's seat, right? But you cannot be in the driver's seat if you don't even get into the car. So we are being censored in a way so that you will not get access to information that you need to make smart, good choices about your health and your family's health. And I find that very, very problematic. So the other thing that's extremely problematic is the way the news industry is writing about these issues. What you will hear, and let me just say, probably everyone in this room has strong feelings one way or the other, or maybe you haven't really thought about it, but you think you should have strong feelings about a lot of modern medicine, whether that has to do with vaccines, cesarean birth, antibiotics, circumcision. What else? I'm trying to touch on some cancer treatments. There we go. These are hot button issues, right? Very hot button issues. And so you have a lot of strong feelings about them one way or the other, or like I said, you maybe don't have strong feelings, but you know that a lot of people do, and you think maybe you should, right? But then you don't see what you're seeing in the mainstream media. So what you're seeing from ABC, CNN, CBS News, even NPR, and in the interest of full disclosure, I work as a freelancer for Jefferson Public Radio, so I have an insight, and nothing that I'm saying here is in any way connected with anything to do with Jefferson Public Radio. I just need to say that. But I see newsrooms from the inside, and what is very disturbing is how much there is a lack of fair and accurate reporting. And what I've seen in my over 15 years career as a freelance journalist and magazine writer, I've written for many different magazines, including Oregon Business Magazine, Smithsonian Magazine. My articles have been in the New York Times, they've been in the Washington Post. But what I've seen is that instead of being more expansive, being more accurate, being more fair, being more open, that we've had a closing down, that the conversations cannot be had. So a Harvard University affiliated doctor, medical doctor who's a psychiatrist who went to Cornell and did her residency at Columbia, sent off an op-ed for USA Today and the Boston Globe and all these other newspapers, and they didn't, and the response that she got back it couldn't have been more fair, more balanced, more intelligent. She couldn't have had better credentials. And she was told by one newspaper, we're not going to talk about that issue. And then about 4 days later, they published an article about the issue being vaccines. And so they said, and the article was absolutely biased. And the bias that you're hearing, so what I want you to know is that when you read articles that repeat the status quo medical sort of literature, medical understanding, standard practice of care, chances are you're hearing fake news. Because remember, our medical system is failing us. So if we're going to spend all of our time just complimenting the medical system, and what that means is that you've heard it over and over again, so much so that it's a mantra that you can just keep repeating, that vaccines are safe and effective, vaccines are safe and effective. It's so hard to even find a single article in a newspaper or magazine about vaccines that doesn't say vaccines are safe and effective. And what's wrong with that? Isn't it true? Well, here's what's wrong with it. The number of vaccines that we're giving is this many by the time a child is 18 years old. Whereas when I was growing up, I was born in 1969, the number of vaccines I got was about this many. So what we have to do is we have to look at each vaccine on a vaccine by vaccine basis in order to talk about the safety profile of the vaccine, the efficacy profile of the vaccine, and the necessity of the vaccine. So to make a blanket statement, vaccines are safe and effective is absolutely fake news. And why does this happen? And then to say in the same article where a 36-year-old man, this just happened a few days ago, like I already shared with you, who was vaccinated then dies of the flu. And that article does absolutely nothing to ask the question, why was somebody who got the flu vaccine and then was given Tamiflu, that person died? In fact, half of the articles, you can look them up when you get home, you're gonna see, because what happens is one newspaper breaks a story and then every newspaper, they don't do their own original reporting, they just repeat the story. And you can go home and look this up. You're gonna see that the article about the flu vaccine spends most of its time actually telling people, oh my God, go get your flu shot. So that's like saying, you went to a buffet and you write an article, and so somebody dies of food poisoning from the buffet, and the headline of the article is that, such and such a food kills 36-year-old man, and then inside the article itself it says, make sure you go back and eat at that buffet. I mean, it's absurd. So the question is, why aren't our journalists, because I know a lot of people and everybody who gets a degree in journalism or who is working as a writer, they're interested in the truth. That's part of what they do. They want to be bulldogs and they want to look for the truth. And maybe 1 out of 25 of them is a psychopath or a sociopath. I don't know. But most of the people that I'm aware of and that I work with are not. So why aren't they giving us the truth about these difficult issues in healthcare today? The first reason is that reporters are generalists. So they don't spend, like I have this article coming out about the rise in suicide in Oregon, and it's going to be on the cover of the Jefferson Journal, and I had the luxury of having 3 months to research it. So I got to read every book that I wanted to read, and I got to interview so many different experts, and I am not an expert in suicide at all. But I got to spend the time to educate myself as much as I could. And even so, I keep learning more things and more things that are taken out that I didn't include in the article, that I feel like I wish I could go back. And this is a long article. I don't know if any of you will make it through the whole thing, but it's 3,500 words. And even with that amount of time, because life, I think, is messy and complicated and interesting and nuanced, and you can't do that in 100-word sound bites. But you especially can't do it when you're a generalist and you don't know. And the thing is that, do you all know how the news comes about, how articles make it into the paper? I mean, this is kind of fascinating. Is there any journalist in the audience here? There is one, okay. So the thing is, so I never went to J school, but my brother did. My brother is now a criminal defense lawyer, and he went to J school at the same time that I was getting a master's degree. And I was always interested, like, how do you know what's going on? The number one way that newspapers know, that journalists and reporters know what's going on, is the press release. So do you all know what a press release is? So a press release is a document that is a propaganda piece, whether it comes from the police station or it comes from the pharmaceutical industry. A press release is propaganda, but it also is news, right? But it's news with a very strong bias and a very strong slant. And one thing a press release does is it gives you sources. It says to you, you want to know about the flu vaccine, here are the 3 experts that you should talk to. And most journalists, unfortunately these days with a 24-hour news cycle when things are being published so fast, don't have the time to actually go and find their own sources. So when you hand them a story, when you've kind of got it wrapped up in a bow and you hand it to them like a present, they're going to take that story and they might even print it verbatim. I'm not going to name any names, but some of our local newspapers have been known to lift out press releases and put them in verbatim. Now, the good news about that is that if you're a nonprofit and you get really savvy with understanding how the media works, you can start getting some really good press. The bad news about that is that there is no money behind, who is putting the money into writing press releases? Well, I'll tell you, one pharmaceutical company, just one, that, pardon me? Oh, sorry, I thought somebody was telling me something. Has an account with one of the major PR firms in the United States. And the reason why I know this is because somebody looked at documents that were upside down on a desk, because this was a person who has a severely vaccine injured child, will not work on the account. They spend $900,000 a year on the PR firm that then does press releases. If you ever wonder why, when somebody dies of the flu who's been flu vaccinated and get Tamiflu, why half of the article is about why you should get your flu shot, you have to start understanding how the information got to the journalists in the first place and who is curating that information. Of course, we all have our biases, right? Even though our job as reporters is supposed to be to report fairly and accurately, we're all going to come to the table with biases. And the thing is that you have to challenge those biases. But if somebody is handing you the information and you're on a deadline and you also need to satisfy your editors, you're just going to go with your bias and you're not going to ask anything beyond that. There's the most obvious reason, which I haven't come to yet, is that you have to look at who owns the media and where the money is coming from. And you don't bite the hand that feeds you. While any given journalist has a lot of interest in actually uncovering more nuance and more information and getting both sides of the story, you really don't bite the hand that feeds you. And I'll just give you one example from my own, because when you talk to editors about this, they bristle. They need to do a lot of tapping because they're going to tell you absolutely not, that our media station is not influenced by the money from advertising. And they're going to say that really genuinely. And I will say, to the credit of National Public Radio, we did an investigation of how women in Oregon were being routinely denied, low-risk women were being denied reimbursement for home births. And we were doing this incredibly careful investigation. It took months and months, and it included FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act, where we asked the state government to release documents to us. And what we found was that there was a bureaucratic system in Salem that basically, you can just imagine a nice big, red stamp, deny, deny, deny. So women who should have had access to home birth were being told that they were not allowed to use their insurance to get access to home birth. And what's crazy about that is that it was in violation of the state's own statutes. It was also in violation of the best and most current medical science that shows that home birth is as safe or safer for low-risk women who are being competently attended. So this decision on behalf of the state is also costing the state a huge amount of money. So what the heck was going on? Well, what was going on is that we had a team in Salem of people who were anti-home birth, and they believed it wasn't safe, and they believed that they knew more about a woman's body than a woman who wanted to have a home birth. And let me tell you, we have such an excellent system, especially in this valley. We have an emergency room doctor in the audience who's probably been the person who saved somebody's life at some point. But whereas if you start to have a home birth and you end up, and something is going wrong, the midwives or whoever is attending you is going to take you to the emergency room, and you're going to be well attended, and you're going to have an excellent outcome. The point is, where do you have a safe baby? But I'm getting off on this tangent, and what I was trying to tell you was that the systematic denial of home birth was something that we were able to publish, and it turned out we were criticizing OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, because that's where the stopping was coming from, and we did it in such a fair and such a balanced way. Not balanced. I mean, we really went after them, and OHA was one of the largest contributors to Jefferson Public Radio. And I can tell you that that was an instance of the news media working correctly. Even though OHA, it turned out, I think it was for some anti-smoking campaign, but so even though OHA was giving huge amounts of money to the media, we were really independently, truly independent. But here's another example from my own immediate experience, so that I'm not just bringing it out of the ether, where I was working for, and I probably won't say the name of the magazine, but a major multi-million subscriber women's magazine. And we wanted to do a story on the harms of antibiotics in feed for chickens, so that if you're giving chickens antibiotics and you're plumping them up, and then humans are eating the antibiotics, the chickens that have measurable amounts in them, that is a potential endocrine disruptor, and it can really start to mess up your system, right? We're seeing early onset puberty in younger and younger people, and we want to know why that is. And I actually had the editor say to me, Purdue is one of our biggest funders. We cannot do this story. So this kind of thing is happening all the time. There's another reason. So status quo medicine, for-profit corporations are controlling the media in a number of ways. The other problem is that people are reluctant. People with alternative points of view have been burned so much. Their words are taken out of context. Anybody who's ever given a quote to the media, I know there's one person in this room who has and had this bad experience with that. Anytime you ever give a quote to the media, you don't know how they're going to use your words, and once bitten, twice shy. So another reason that we're not getting fair and accurate information about the most pressing health concerns is that people are reluctant. The best sources, that Harvard-affiliated medical doctor is reluctant to put their name, people are reluctant to put their name out there because we are herd animals and we don't want to be outside of the fold. And so everything stays as if it's a consensus, even though it's not. And the truth is that there are now tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of families who have seen that following status quo medicine is resulting in terrible problems with vaccine injury, with disrupted immunity, with disrupted brains. And that this is a huge problem that families are facing, and they are there, and we're not hearing about them. We're just hearing this kind of crazy, like those anti-vaxxers who are spreading the measles, as opposed to anytime you hear somebody being labeled as something, you have to stop and take a step back and say, wait a second, where did that label come from? Is it really true? I mean, the people who are being accused of being, quote, anti-vaccine, if you're missing just one vaccine, if you decide not to do the hepatitis B vaccine for your child at birth, which is a vaccine that none of you had to give your children, but it's for a sexually transmitted disease, most people in Ashland who are educated say no thank you to that vaccine. You're lumped in with the anti-vacciners. If your child is completely 100% up to date on his or her vaccines, but had a terrible reaction to the last set, and now you've gone to your doctor for a medical exemption because it's not safe, your child could die if he or she were vaccinated again, you're all of a sudden lumped in as a crazy anti-vaxxer. If you have a child who had vaccines and died within a few months old baby and dies within a few hours of that vaccine, as there are some now very vocal people on social media that Facebook and Pinterest and everybody else is trying to shut down. So this is you are the person who followed exactly what you were supposed to do, and now your child is dead. You're considered anti-vaccine. So one thing I would ask you to do is that every time you see that moniker, maybe substitute in your mind with when you see anti-vaxxers, just change those words in your mind and say children's health advocates or children's health activists, because I will put to you that the people that are being mislabeled and maligned are actually the people who are the most concerned about the good of our health as a collective. Jordan, how many minutes do I have left? I have 5 minutes left. Okay. All right, well, this is what I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you a lot of other things, but how do you separate fact from fiction, and how do you take back your health? Because I think that's one thing that we all can agree that we absolutely all have in common, is that we want to keep our children safe and healthy. We want to be safe and healthy. We want to survive and we want to thrive. And there's so much out there. There is so much. And so how do you know? How do you know what's true and how do you know what's false? And there's a bigger conversation that maybe we'll be able to have this afternoon about sort of what is the truth, is there a capital T, and what is false, especially when it comes to your body and your health. I mean, and the first thing I'll tell you is something that Lori already told you, which is listen to your body, because you know your body more than anybody else does, and your body is going to give you the signals that you need to be healthy, including following your intuition. There's someone in the audience who was diagnosed with cancer and knew that getting radiation chemotherapy was not the way for her to be cured. And she listened to her body and she listened to her intuition. And I have to just point her out. I hope you don't mind that I'm outing you right now. But you know, this might be the oldest person that we have in this room, and she's probably the healthiest. And that, I'm not saying that not doing radiation and chemotherapy is right for everyone, but I'm saying that you know more about your body than anyone else does, and you have to read past the headlines, which is another really important thing. I would encourage you all to become science nerds. One of the most amazing things about the internet today is that when somebody mentions an article, when you see a headline about it, you can actually go back, you can go on PubMed, and 9 times out of 10, you can get that article free of charge. If you can't and it's behind a paywall, go into SOU and have the experience of spending some time in that library, and they will get the article for you. They'll print it off for you. You'll have to spend 10 cents a page, I think, in order to get it printed, so that you can actually read the science yourself. There is no, you know, one of the ways that we shut down the conversation is we say, well, if you're an obstetrician, you can't have an opinion about emergency medicine. And if you're a physicist, you're not allowed to know about chemistry. We all know that that's complete malarkey, and that you can actually use your brain any way you want to and learn about anything. I don't care if you've never been to college and you've never read a science article in your life, you can still do it. And then, I don't have time to go through this, but so I'll just leave this with you, which is that there's fascinating research that's been done about longevity and about the people in the blue zones. Have you heard of the blue zones, which are the people in the world that live the longest, healthiest, most vibrant lives? And so if you look up the blue zones, you'll find out something called the Power 9. And the Power 9 is 9 things. And again, this is through the bias of these journalists. It's a whole group of longevity experts and journalists and media people who went and interviewed. But they did interview almost 300 centenarians and asking them and trying to sort of tabulate what they had in common. And you know, some of the things about, just a couple of them are, and you already know this, of course, everybody in here knows this, but it's moving naturally throughout the day, which is why I was so glad that both of our other speakers got you all to get up. That having a sense of purpose so that you know why you're getting up in the morning, and that sounds really grandiose. It doesn't have to be that you want to run for president or fix climate change tomorrow, although I hope everybody in this room does want to do those 2 things. But your sense of purpose can be that you want to stay healthy for your grandkids, or you know, or you want to work helping people through their traumatic experiences. And then the very best way, so you can take back your health information, your health, by finding really what the best health information is, listening to your own body and applying it to yourself. And of course, the very best way to avoid fake news is to turn off the TV and to get off the internet and take a break from social media. But that doesn't mean to take a break from being in community and being with other people. So you're already doing it by being here at this conference today and forging new connections and spending more time in real life, in real space with real people than you are sort of in the positive space of being here today with us than in the negative space of fake news. Thank you.